All right, welcome to our final session of the day, and I'm very, very pleased and happy and excited to welcome Professor Beatriz Calvo Merino from City University here today. So, Bea is a friend of mine, first and foremost, but also one of a few people who have sort of like really brought dance and neuroscience to the foreground as a sort of field. And she's also been, well, I guess, been part of NeuroLive as an observer. And so she's going to chair a session just focusing a little bit on reflections on the science on the project. And with that, I'm handing over to Bea.
Thank you. And I feel like, I don't need a microphone to talk. Unlike Daniel, it's not the first time I give a talk without shoes, but it's still very awkward. And this morning I remember to bring decent socks because I learned from my mistakes. So it's a pleasure to be here when Matthias and Guido, who are now very good friends, asked me if I could chair this session. I said yes, not knowing that I had an hour to manage a lot of questions about this project. But let's start from the beginning. So the session is focused on the scientific practice and reflection, and is entitled, What have you done and how did it go? So I would like to ask each of you very briefly in one sentence to say who you are. I know you have been here the whole day, but if you could briefly introduce yourself. Some of you haven't talked before. And briefly say in one sentence, what have you done in the NeuroLive project? We have heard already some of you talking about your past work, and how did it go? And I'm going to start by the ladies. So,
hi again. So I'm Albane Arthuis, and I've been a PhD student on the NeuroLive project since How Shall We Begin Again? So 3 years. And what I've mainly been doing is processing and analyzing eye tracking data, but also a bit of EEG data. And it's been very exciting. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, so I'm Sonia. I entered the NeuroLive project also on How Shall We Begin Again, so on the second performance as a postdoc. And I've been in charge of dealing with that EEG data from that performance, and so far we managed to give a time structure that worked and that allowed us to synchronize, and I hope soon enough we will be able to have results to present back to the community.
Thank you, Sonia. And you met already Jamie, but let's tell us about what have you done in the NeuroLive and how did it go? Very, very briefly.
I was involved in Snakeskin in the Wild and readings of what was never written. In both of those projects, I worked on the data collection, synchronization stuff on the experimental side, and sound stuff for Snakeskin, and creative AI, where we built, or Mirko and I, made a system for motion tracking and text-to-speech using AI.
Thank you. And so we move to next, Jamie? Just sort of.
Hello, I'm Jamie Ward, and I've been involved with NeuroLive since the beginning, and my involvement is as the wearable and tech person, overseeing that and some of the signal processing work.
Thank you. And finally, Daniel.
My name's Daniel, and in NeuroLive I've been doing sort of the easier behavioral questions and trying to ask some of the same questions in NeuroLive but in the lab to give converging evidence. That's my role as I see it. How have I done? I've got lots more data, but somehow slightly less understanding.
So, thank you. Maybe leave them with them. Thank you for your introduction. So, I had two branches in this discussion. I would like to talk a little bit about some details and also a little bit about generalization and beyond the project. Since we have a lot of people here that have actually been working hands-on data, I'm going to start by the details, and then we can move more and more general. So maybe I'm looking here at Sonia and Albane, but feel free to chip in. Do you think, basically what you have been doing, you have all this brain data and eye data and behavioral data, and you have transformed all these numbers into a narrative. Could you tell us a little bit about how this physiology actually, maybe not how it works because we don't have the time, but what can it tell us?
Yeah, so I think, well, what can the EEG tell us? It can tell us so many things, right? What I think perhaps rather than what can EEG tell us is like what is interesting to understand using EEG from this particular experiment. It's not an experiment. So I think like the most important thing that we can look at is what happens in the real world. How are different people in the audience sort of like having the same activity, and therefore we understand as very similar experience in terms of like how are they engaging at specific points that can be predicted by the choreography of the narrative, certain things that we've been discussing. Also, what is the role of different frequency bands? So we have all these EEG. What we record is just brain waves. So you see this number of lines just moving and moving at different frequencies and moving more or less. There's the amplitude, so how big is the movement. There's the frequency, so how quick or how slow are those oscillations. I think these are brain patterns that they are not yet completely understood when it comes to these sort of experiences, because we haven't gathered enough information in such naturalistic sort of experiences. So yeah, I don't know if I have a conclusive answer there.
Albane, you wanted to complete?
Yeah, I can pitch in a bit. I think, okay, two things. I think mainly from, I'm going to start by the second thing. I think I refer to something that you said in the panel yesterday, that we are studying these live performances, but we're using all these types of measurement that are only giving us a glimpse of what the performance actually is and what an artwork actually is. And we can't, of course, like measure everything or describe everything using measurements, but we are only having these little glimpses, and then we can analyze these glimpses to have an idea of the big work. So if I use my own experience, mainly working on the eye trackers, so you have all these fixation points, but you also have blinking that have so many different dimensions. And also the questionnaires with people answering and being different, but I think from those, the few findings that I have is that of other different performances, what's interesting is that actually engagement or other measures are more conclusive about the work in itself than on individual differences, that what has an effect on people is more the work in itself than them being, or me being Albane. I come and I attend this, of course, not myself, but what has an impact in itself is the work, if that makes sense, and not only my previous experience, my previous experiences or who I am. Yeah, that's a bit like a narrative I would go for. Yeah.
And do you think this transformation between data and the narrative can come back to the artists?
I think that's something we have explored a lot in this symposium yesterday and here today, and I think that's also what you said just earlier. It's not answering a question. I'm not aiming to like modify any work, but I think you were saying that this morning, that it informs the artist and then it's co-creating in a sense, but also just informing that now all the artists we work with, and maybe they would read or like consume any output that we produce, they are aware of it. And of course, when you produce something, you're using everything that you've consumed before, so it's just participating in like this flow of creation, I guess, yeah.
And you have mentioned the word artist several times, and I mean you, and also earlier today. But within the art and within the performing arts, you have been focusing. This project NeuroLive is about dance. How do you think that the work you have done with dance can be generalized to other art disciplines? We can think about performing arts like music or theater. Or what will you have to modify, to adapt from what you have done to be able to extend it to other disciplines? Maybe, who would like to answer this?
I might say a little thing on that. Like I said earlier, I view theatre in a more broader sense, and even within the dance that was done as part of this. I mean, if I look at the work of Snakeskin in the Wild, that Doc Kenneth Hill put together, it's incredibly, it's not just dance, it's acting, it's clowning, it's interaction, there's so much going on there. It's all in performance, which I think I'd prefer to use. There's music, so there is music there. In this field of like studying audiences and performers, there's a lot of work historically on music, just like classical music performances. So like to explore doing it in dance and theatre is a kind of the novelty, but there's a lot of overlap, and yeah, I'd make subtle shifts depending on what was going on in a specific performance. But yeah, I think it's on a case by case basis. I wouldn't silo them as dance, theatre, and so on. I don't think it's as easy to do that.
I guess you can divide this question in two. You can say, can you generalize this methodology to apply to other art disciplines? And can you generalize the results that you are obtaining from these particular results to how other audiences engage?
Yeah, I think that's a challenge, because we always want to generalize, but every experiment is different. And also, in truth, these are experiments, but they're not really designed as experiments. They're designed as performance pieces first, and we've sort of worked the experimentation around it. So it's a very non-classical way of trying to do science. So that, we've lost track of any of the variables. We're really just trying to say, right, what can we uncover here, I guess? I mean, you could certainly say more than that.
Yeah, I sort of feel like, I mean, for me, it brings me back to what Daniel said earlier about sort of like so we're looking at synchrony measures a lot, in whether that's in heart rate or in the brain. And I think where I see overlap is in the sort of what high engagement is. I think like, that's more of an intuition I have at the moment. So I feel like these moments of high engagement, when sort of brains synchronize and audiences synchronize and they are tied to specific events, that sort of, I think that my intuition is that something that generalizes quite well across movies, across football matches, and maybe also across dance. I think for me, the interesting differences lie in what the sort of desynchronization means. And I think when I go into the context of advertising or sort of film or stuff that that's just all the stuff that just jumps at me that haven't necessarily chosen to engage with in the first place, I think there the analogy between sort of synchronization means engagement and desynchronization means disengagement holds. But I don't think it necessarily holds in our live performances. I think that comes up with discussions in artists, but also my own experience. But I'm not quite sure yet how to look at that. I think what disengagement or desynchronization means is merely that the audiences are not attending to the same thing. And that doesn't mean that they're disengaged. It just means that their attention is sort of more idiosyncratically organized in space. And that in itself may well be artistically directed. So I think that's a sort of interesting distinction between, let's say, going to a live performance of something that I choose to see and something that just comes at me. Yeah.
And what you like? You are going to say something.
Oh no, I was just going to add to what Guido was saying, and that's, I think, about exactly what he said in terms of our work. We have this measure to look at synchrony, and that's our measure of engagement, and the higher the synchrony, the better the engagement. But I do think that works. In my mind, the most engaging thing, we're honed in on Spielberg movies, right? The reason he's so successful is he can get an entire audience of different people to have exactly the same tear shed when E.T. dies, and that's his genius.
Yes, he does.
What's that?
He doesn't die.
Oh, sorry. No, he doesn't die. Sorry. I upset anyone. E.T. does not die. There's a moment everyone thinks he dies. Sorry.
He's still alive and well.
So sorry. E.T. is safe, everyone. Also, doesn't really exist, but that's okay. So that's what our tools are sort of focused on. But then there's a whole other bit of artistic experience which is about producing division and confusion and defeating expectation that I don't think the tools I was looking at are able to tap into as well. We're better at the Spielbergs. We can maybe predict Oscar winners and Spielbergs and box office things, not the artistic directors who are doing something new and interesting.
But you cannot predict Eurovision, but you can predict a Hollywood hit.
I will be much more confident. Yeah, that's why our successful measures are global box office takings, right? Because we're getting that group common response. That's our hypothesis, anyway.
And what is the price? And maybe this can be for you, Jamie, because you have been the one suffering with synchronization, finding your right synchronization. You talk about experimental. This is not an experiment, but this is a series of performances that include experiments. And you have manipulations, and you have variables that you measure. But how, you obviously cannot do the same manipulations that you will do in a laboratory because you are in a live performance. So what is the cost of doing experimentation live? And we have heard a little bit about how difficult it is to synchronize, for example, any piece of data set. But what is the cost of these live manipulations, and what will you maybe will make different to make your life easier if you will have a second chance to run these projects again?
So that makes me think about kind of annotations of what's happening, and that's something that I think we did quite well at, actually, and Mirko was in charge of most of that. So we, throughout every performance, there was more or less very tightly scheduled events or sequences of things. I think we always had a structure, but within that there was variable amounts of time things might take. And one of our jobs during the performances, or Mirko's was in charge of this, looking at the action, looking at what's going on, making notes of things that happened in the show. So we've got all of these labels or kind of annotations of, this thing happened, or this thing ran longer than it should have, or we're going into Q6, whatever, and all of that getting saved in the data, so then it's available when we're looking to analyze it. We can kind of cross-reference all of these things that happened.
Is this something that was, because I have been an observer through different performance over the years, and I am not a dancer, I'm just an experimental psychologist, so I noticed how you have increased the number of annotations on different performances. Is this as a consequence of needing more annotations to be able to analyze the data better? Does it interfere with the performance, the number of annotations?
guess I can't speak to the longer trajectory, but I think there's probably something going on about learning each other's languages. So, our annotations and perhaps not necessarily have got more frequent, but they've probably got better to enable us because we know what we're trying to look for. And I think in general that's one of the things that I think is very interesting about art and science, or doing this kind of collaboration is about trying to understand each other's perspectives and what is important in this. What does this mean? Because we can't see it in the numbers a lot. Most of the time it's kind of contextual things. So it's super inspiring for me, like to learn how somebody else thinks about the thing that they're into, their specialism, their skill that they've spent years, which I can only glimpse. But just having the opportunity to see something in that is really humbling and great.
If I could just add on that, what you're mentioning about annotations, particularly in machine learning or any topic like that where you're collecting data, a fundamental thing you need is a ground truth. You need to know what was happening so you can say, oh yeah, that signal is lined up with this important thing that was happening. But to decide on what those annotations are going to be, what that ground truth should be, how detailed you should measure it, it's quite hard. You can make assumptions before you've done the experiment, said, oh yeah, we're interested in whenever a beat changes in the choreography, right? So we're going to mark every time there's a beat change, we'll put it in there. But then it turns out you're analysing the data and you're like, oh, we should have measured the bit whenever people jump. I don't know. You find moments you're like, oh, we didn't annotate that. So when we first did it 4 or 5 years ago, tried to annotate absolutely. Mirko's been brilliant at building software that does these annotations as we go and adding extra information. And there's times when we've just recorded far too much information that's been really irrelevant. So trying to stream that down so that it's like, these are the important bits. When we did How Shall We Begin Again, which was a 16-hour durational performance, you weren't going to make a little annotation every time someone jumped. That just wasn't going to happen. But you could make an annotation. Mirko built a piece of software that whenever the music changed, it was using a big streaming service that shall not be named, but we took a cue from whenever the music pieces changed, and that's recorded. And that's a useful annotation because it helped us to record all the beats and things and be able to then analyse the data better later. But the other thing about annotation is that's where we're learning from theatre. That in terms of sensor data collection, this is even going back decades. Whenever we're collecting lots of data with poor clocks, we've looked to theatre and film as inspiration. So the original synchronization point where you can get the same signal across all the sensors you have is the clapperboard in film. It's sound and visual. You can align on a moment. And in theatre, there's always someone at the back pushing buttons. There's cues of when the lighting changes, when the sound changes, and that's all got to be timed. So we learned from that by having similar methods about how we annotate our data, synchronize our data. And I think there's an awful lot, there's multiple papers in this, you guys, of all the lessons we've learned through the years on specifically that issue of annotation and working with very messy data, even in a very nice constrained scenario as dance.
And does this interfere somehow with the creation of the performance? And I mean, Matthias is sitting in front of me. I don't know if he wants to chip in but does the need for having annotations interfere, or how do you work with the artists when you know you need these specific annotations in your performance? You will need a light change every now and then. You will need a different, or it doesn't. You can say it doesn't.
Yeah, well, if I maybe I don't entirely understand what you mean by annotations, because so these are, I guess, synchronization points and annotations. Are those different things?
Well, I took annotations from his.
They're not involved. We do it behind the scenes. So that's the whole idea, is that it's completely,
It's blind to the artist.
Mostly. Synchronization again.
Yeah, so the main answer in that case is no, it doesn't make a difference because, to the extent that layer can take place without the artist needing to worry about it. But then there are particular examples like we did in the first year where there was a lighting change. Like Jamie mentioned earlier, the sort of blackouts that were used as synchronization points, which I guess are annotations in this context. So it depends on the technology, but it became very independent after the first year, really.
It was driven by the artists, so if they had a music change, we would say, right, we'll use that. If there happened to be a lighting change, ideally we'd use it, but when there was no lighting change, we're like, can we have a lighting change, please? So there was some negotiation, but
Yeah, fantastic.
So, sorry, just to jump in. So, marine biology. So, we should be able to know how whales and dolphins and belugas communicate, in theory, because I've been working with an aquarium. We have enormous numbers of recordings of those clicks and whistles that belugas make, hundreds and hundreds of hours of them. We've got superpower computers, like do ChatGPT, these big LLMs, feed all that information about beluga whistles and clicks into it, and the computer should be able to figure out how to talk to belugas. People thought this was going to happen 5 years ago, and there's £1 million prize for the first person that can speak to a beluga. But it's not going to happen, ever. Because if you talk to the people who look after all these whales, the trouble is annotations. Because we don't know what's going on in the beluga world when they make that click. And all we have is patterns of information unless we can tie what does that beluga mean to that beluga. Is he angry about what that beluga said a week ago? And because we don't know that information, we can't annotate the data, and we just can't learn from it. It's just patterns. So the question for us is Matthias just a big beluga floating around that we will never understand? But it's an exactly parallel problem, I think.
Wow. Okay, so if we move a little bit beyond the dance stage to the real world or to the aquarium, you have been working with dance, with dancers, with the audience, and this has been a pivotal point to understand social interactions in this particular context. But your aim as scientists is go beyond an interpretation of what's going on in this particular room. This has been the setting of many of your performance and experiments. What can NeuroLive give to the neuroscience out there that is trying to understand social interactions in the world?
give it to the neuroscientist.
I think that touches on two things. The first one is the specificity of dance and performance, and there's lots of specificity in that. And the second one touches on the idea of expertise, both on the performer side and on the audience side. And I think my view of that is that which is perhaps, it's just like, there's just my again, sort of a hunch at the moment. And it's probably up for discussion. So from what I've seen in the data and other studies as well, is there is not necessarily, I would say there's not necessarily a qualitative difference in the expert communication that sort of happens between performers or between performers and audience or even between audience members. So I would say it's not qualitatively different, it's just more clear and more refined. So I mean, when I look at sort of my own studies on sort of fMRI studies on comparing expert and dancers, I don't necessarily see a completely different pattern. I just see it's sort of noisier in people who don't have that experience, or so I think a lot about, and also think, if I think about what my impression is of what artists train that we're working with and what the audiences go with, there's a certain, it's often a clarity of expression and a clarity of intention and sort of like matching of what I'm doing to what I'm communicating. So it reminds me of sort of like what one of my teachers at the Folkwang said to me, like, what is dance? It's just like knowing what you're doing at any given moment in time. And I feel like there is something of that in the practice of dancing, and I think there's also something of that of the practice in the audience, that there's sort of like, I know at what point there's a sort of intuitive sense of like, I know what's going on. Not even I know what this means, I know what's going on. And in that respect, I think it does generalize, so it does go beyond dance and it does go beyond experts. But this refinement is probably specific to different genres or different experts. Yeah.
So
I think that's where I'm on this.
This the model of expertise has been used in neuroscience to understand any particular process, because, as you mentioned, it's more defined, easier to see, and then everybody have it in a slightly different way, and that's where we got all individual differences and the standard deviations that you later make art with. How do you create a model from this perfect mechanism that is the expert, that you can feed back into the art community, that in this case artists, performers, but how do you send your information to the art community? How do you think they process it? What aspect do you think they process that they can think it is useful for them to create art? So, and we can make it more narrow to what you have done. So the NeuroLive outputs, whether they are from the performing side or from the artistic side, how do you think are taken by the by the artistic community to allow them to continue creating art?
I think work like this is really valuable to me personally because it makes me see another perspective. It makes me glimpse something from the outside, which might be inspiring. It might help me see or appreciate other people's perspectives in whatever art form we're working in. And I guess I think of art practices as being very, they're fundamentally social things. That you make art to share and engage with, and I think being parts of communities that explore that's kind of how I see creativity. It's like this exploratory collective endeavour in a social cultural context. A lot of stuff doesn't work, but that's fine because it's a collective effort to find what works and find what might be new. And I think having this kind of extra level of sort of science looking at some of these problems, it's not going to make art, or even if it could make, like the AI kind of question, if AI can just make great art, I mean, to me it's not terribly interesting. I still want to make art, and maybe if the AI is making art, it can give me another perspective again on, okay, I see what you did there, that's interesting. I don't know why or how you did it, it doesn't really matter, but from a collective of artists trying to innovate and discover and share, the neuroscience perspective is another good thing to have on the available.
I just wanted to add to that because I think like these questions keep being asked from the perspective of what can we bring to the artist in a way, but I think from my own experience, I think I'm not sure, for example, for the preparation of the third performance, I was having a series of talks with Snake Skin, with Dr. Hill, and they were asking me things about the brain. We were trying to create a common space where we could understand the intentions of each other in a way that I really valued the curiosity that came to me in that sense from them. But I am, if I reflect on that now, I don't know if I learned more than them, from those conversations. I think, obviously, I think I really, really loved seeing the performance afterwards and seeing what they've done with, the information that I was trying to like transmit from the science. But then like I also think like I learned so much about that perspective, that curiosity, that process that they have as well. So I think it's a constant communication in that sense.
And do you think that communication enhances your aesthetic experience when you watch the performance?
Yeah, I think I don't know, but I think I want to think that it has allowed me to perhaps increase my sensitivity to certain aspects that I wasn't so familiar with before.
There's this debate about who benefits from this work. Is it the artist? Is it the scientist? I think there's something to be said for the value of the endeavour in itself, as a thing itself. We are exploring, trying to understand a little bit more about what happens in people's brains and bodies when they're in live performance. That's an interesting question. I think everyone in this room thinks it's an interesting question. That's why we're all here. And that's worth studying without necessarily saying, well, what's the ultimate purpose of this? Because if we always ask what's the ultimate purpose of something, we'll never really look at anything, because it's not all of us about the ultimate outcome. It's not to say there won't be some useful outcomes from this. It's just, I think the question itself is worth it in itself.
I was going to be slightly devil's advocate and say expertise is massively overrated. But that may be because I'm obviously not a dance expert. And if dance is knowing what you're doing at every moment in time, I'm absolutely not a dance expert.
Maybe you are and you don't know.
No, absolutely not. You haven't seen me dance. And what I mean by it being overrated is, I think in one sense, expertise is a difference between people. But if you think there are dance experts and non-dance experts, they'll have a different reaction to stuff. I think you're overweighting that difference. Because if you look at our shared understanding of things like body language, we have such massive and nuanced understanding of the minutiae of each other's behavior, right? If you hold someone's eye contact for 100 milliseconds too long, you look a bit dodgy. You can tell exactly from someone sitting what mood they're in. We're all hyper-expert at all this stuff of social interaction. And dance expertise is a little bit more, for sure, but against the context of our shared understanding of movement, I think the expertise is quite small. That would be my opinion. Watching a dance performance, if you know nothing to dance, it's not like reading a book in a language you don't understand. It's not all gibberish to you. It's more like going to a restaurant and you don't have a refined palate in that wine. If you do have a refined palate, you can tell differences other people can't see, but it's still fundamentally good food that you're enjoying or not. So I think expertise might be overweighting the finer differences and underestimating the massive shared understanding we have.
Can I reply to that? I have my own microphone. But, I mean, even if it is a very small difference, expertise effect, it is a difference that we can measure. And isn't this the same size or the same importance as the difference that we can measure with individual difference? For example, being a Spanish person, when I see my son walking over a bonfire, I have different level of experience than my husband and my cousin and other relative members. So these small individual differences, they allow us to understand the general human being. So I want to make a point for the importance of expertise, even if the effect is small, as far as we can measure it. That might be the case. But if we go back to the non-experts, like Daniel and like myself, who I'm not a dancer either, can naive people benefit from understanding and taking from Sonia's comment, understanding some context, information, or what can you feed the naive observer to enhance the aesthetic experience or enhance that synchronization during observation, how all of this can feed and change how the observer sees and feels and the brain waves behave.
I have I have a story while they're thinking. This idea of like how much you need to know to be able to enjoy or engage with something, I don't think it needs to be an awful lot, but it needs to be something. So there is a story, I think, and it could be wrong, about Van Gogh and the sunflowers. And Van Gogh painted these sunflowers, everyone knows them, and I always thought they're really bloody boring. I did not enjoy, I was looking at them thinking, just a painting of sunflowers. But then someone told me a story, and I hope it's true, but one of the reasons he painted them was he had a friend that was at Gauguin, and Gauguin was going to come and visit him in his country house, and he'd prepared a room for Gauguin, and he'd put flowers out, picked flowers fresh, put them out for it, made the room nice. Gauguin didn't show up. Some months later, Gauguin says, "Oh, sorry, I just couldn't make it. I couldn't make it. I'll come again next week." So Van Gogh went out and he got some nice flowers, cut them up, put them in the bedside table, made it all nice, made the room nice, waited for his friend to come, and he didn't come. And this happened again and again, and in the end, he just thought, the flowers keep withering, so he just painted the flowers and put it up for his friend to come and visit. I mean, Gauguin was a dick, but that story suddenly transformed my interpretation of those sunflower paintings. So whenever I go to the National Gallery, I start getting a bit teary. The context is everything, and it's only a little iota of it, and I think that's true for a lot of appreciation of art or whatever have you. You don't need to be an expert, you just need to know a little bit, something.
What do you need to know? What is that little bit?
Oh, yeah, I don't know about your story. I'm just, whether it's true or not, I'm not sure it's about the context of the artwork, but mostly about what you attach to the artwork when you see it, and it's mostly your personal history and what you reminisce to. So, I guess my point is not very much about the context and knowing something that is true or knowing something tangible about the artwork, but what it reminds you of. So it's slightly different, and it's not expertise to that point, but was going back to expertise. So I don't know, I'll give it back to you. Maybe because you had a question.
No, I was going to ask, what was that little extra thing?
No, I agree with the personal experience is a big thing. There's a theatre game you can play. I think it's related to mask work, where you get a performer to, you don't tell them anything, you give them the instruction. I want you to walk in, stand in front of everyone, look up, smile, then look down, don't smile, turn to the right, walk off. That's all you need to do. And then you get them to repeat it twice. In the first instance, you tell the audience, without that person hearing, you tell them that this person's going to come in. They forgot to wear their trousers. They're coming in, they're half naked, and they didn't realise it. So the person comes in, goes like that, smiles, looks down, goes like that, and walks in, and everyone laughs. I mean, it can be funny. They find it jolly. If you do the same thing again, but you tell them a different story, you say, they're going to come in and they're actually not feeling very good, and they're looking on the edge of a railway track, but they see you and they change their mind, and they go. Suddenly everything changes. Now, the actor doing it has no idea what the story is, but suddenly the people that were laughing a minute ago are now crying. So that little bit of contextual information really sets the scene for so much of our perception of any kind of performance, I think. Which may be coming from your own personal experience, or it may be something that's given to you by the story or narrative. How that relates to this, I don't know.
I'm just going to add something about music. So, on relating to sort of expertise, listening to music is a very complicated thing to do. Decomposing sound into culturally context cues and structures and patterns that make sense, and anybody that's listen to music, is able to enjoy music without having the perhaps explicit or theoretical knowledge of how that's working, scales or chords, or never even played an instrument. But the expertise of a musical listener is immense, and I suppose it made me think about kind of just sensory experience as a kind of basis, a shared kind of basis for enjoyment of art. And I wonder if perhaps the expertise thing might be an interesting thing that comes into play when it's the creating of novel things. I certainly think, obviously people with the kind of naivistic approaches to making stuff, it does happen. You can hit upon a great new thing by chance or ego or something. But I think from what I've in sort of creativity kind of literature, it's often the expertise comes into play with respect to the efficiency or the quickness that you can arrive at something or judge something or have a sense of how this might work for a shared for an audience. And somebody with just the more sort of like sensory expertise of living in the world can certainly perceive that, but they might not be quite so good at judging or creating things with intent and getting the effect that intention was trying to create.
I like what you mentioned, getting that effect that you intend. Do performance have in mind a particular effect they want to inflict in the audience? You are measuring the brainwaves and you are looking for synchrony within the observers. Is the intensity of the synchrony a measure of that successful transmission between the art and the observer?
I think it can be if you can triangulate enough different points of reference and measurements and qualitative information and and know what those things mean.
Could you transform the synchrony into clapping, and that will be a representation of how much people enjoy a performance at the end? If you can see how much synchrony between the audience members you have in the room, transform that auditory.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Interesting to try.
And you also mentioned, Jamie, you also mentioned artificial intelligence a lot, and we didn't talk about it. What role do you think the information you get from NEUROLIVE data can play in interacting with artificial intelligence and how it creates performance art for the future? Is this something that you envision, like convert your NEUROLIVE data, integrate it with artificial intelligence to...
I think it's an interesting problem, so I'm going to skip actually answering that directly. But one of the things I think is really interesting about doing this in a dance context, and it might be because I'm not an expert in it, but to compare with music, one of the things that music, or at least notated Western classical folk, or just music like that has got such a rich sort of theory about it, and it kind of lends itself to symbolic representations, and I suppose it's a proxy for the experience. And I think a lot of the work that I've done in sort of music representation, music psychology, is at that level of kind of symbolic representation, and you can do a lot with that. It allows you to get quite far because you know what things mean, and you've got a small set of variables that you can kind of manage. But one of the things that I really like about dance is that, at least for me, that is kind of, it evades that beautifully. It's about the physicality and the experience of the moment, and the liveness is so acute, which, I mean, it is in a musical experience too, but music can so easily be abstracted. Lots of music is based on music research, or music psychology is based on analysing scores, which are proxies for the experience. So I like that this kind of work forces us to talk about things that we cannot put words on. And I think AI, it kind of vaguely connects to AI, in that there is something about evolving a language to describe patterns, so things that we can see, things that we can observe and measure, and then through dialogue and talking and working together in collaboration, try and figure out what those things mean, and do we mean the same thing by these things. And so So triangulating between all these bits of information, I think AI can have an interesting role. Whether it can be creative or not, I'll let somebody else talk because I could go on about that.
Well, it's a different project. Can I ask each of you to answer this final question? Jamie, you just mentioned many potential ideas that they obviously were not fitting in this project. If you will have 5 million for the next 5 years to spend, and a nice blanket, which of these ideas would you like to develop? And could you? I mean, maybe you can think a second about this. What will you do with this future project? What questions do you have no answers? Will you do collaborations in the same way like you have done in NEUROLIVE between artists and scientists, or will you change a little bit how these synergies were working? Anybody want to go first? 5 million on the table. What will you do? Same, different. What will you change?
I think I'll go first because I'm probably the one that knows less. So I don't even know what 5 million is. I guess for me right now there are still so many questions in the NEUROLIVE data and all the things that we've explored. But I think what I really liked in this symposium is that conversation that was happening yesterday about the outputs of the project. There are so many things that we've done on all sides of the project, artistically, scientifically, and together. And I think I really enjoy this act of being together and all of these conversations. And I think that's really what's exciting me the most today, just like creating a bit this space or continuing to have this conversations. I think it would be a shame that it stops there, just because this is the end of the project, you know, or it's just like, it's just like some reminiscence of it, of like sometimes you see someone and you're like, your life was really nice, you know. No, I just think it's like, it's something in itself, the conversation that also might happen in very different projects. And so I don't know about 5 million, but I guess just for me, just for me, I just really like to continue having this space as something that's like continuous in time for at least a few years. So yeah.
So you have created a bridge between these two communities, and you want to maintain it and make it lively.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, just the fact that people got together to do this, and all the conversation it created is already like such a wealth in itself, and it would be a shame that it like stops there. I think it would be such a loss of knowledge and experience. So I guess that's just like what I would like to do and what I would like to participate in the future. But yeah, does anyone have? Yeah.
Thank you. Who wants to go?
Just a thing that I've been thinking about that would be cool to do is somehow make the science and the technology have perhaps slightly more agency in the artistic process and in the live performance. So I suppose like very simply, kind of one example would be like the sort of neurofeedback idea that's we haven't really looked at specifically in this project, but I like the idea of kind of closing those loops between the artistic creation and the live experience, making that more coupled, and just to kind of see what might happen, where that would take us.
Thank you.
So yeah, I'm with Albane. Like, what is 5 million? I don't know. But I think like
€2.5 million.
It's difficult symbol in my head. I think for me, I find that this project for me has been extremely interesting, and it has been a very powerful learning tool in many ways. Like, it's obviously quite a special multidisciplinary sort of space that is allowing us to learn from a lot of different things, a lot of different skills at the same time. And I think that's certainly something that I would maintain. But I think perhaps from my sciencey brain, what I would try to achieve if there was a next round would be two big concerns, like one, replication. Like we need science, we need to replicate things, we need to. And because of the nature of these artworks, that there was just one thing happening once, I think I would feel the need for try to accommodate somehow for something on like replication. But I think there was also like when I look back and it's like all the different performances, it's been so rich in terms of variety. So I think like for me that's a very important concept that we shouldn't lose. So I think like for me it would be very interesting as well to, at the same time that I would try to, make some space for some sort of replication happening, I would try to maintain the diversity of perspectives and diversity of artistic work, because I think that can bring things that perhaps we don't understand yet in the science.
I think my desires are purely HR related. I would hire more scientists, and I think I put all artists, if I can, on permanent contracts.
You could have mic dropped after that one.
Go ahead.
I mean,
I can't follow that shameful.
no, I know it's too virtuous. So once I've bought the nice house and a modest-sized yacht, I'll probably put my scientists in a little booth and get them to press a keyboard. No, absolutely the HR. I mean, that's the best question. That's the best answer. There's so many questions that come out of this, and I'm going to roll back on something I said about doing this work for its own sake. That is absolutely a motivating factor in so many ways. There's so many interesting questions, but equally, society doesn't always appreciate or judge the tremendous benefit that the arts performance bring to society as a whole, to mental well-being, to on every metric it is good for us. Yet when it comes to politicians making decisions about these things, they're like, oh yeah, that's just a little fancy extra, that's not so important. So whatever evidence and whatever thing they need in a document in front of them, and usually it's just numbers, right? We did this blind controlled trial, 10,000 depressed people did this, and most of them turned out a bit better, right? If we can do studies like that, and there's quite a few that we've all talked about in the course of these projects, working with disadvantaged communities and trying to study theatre and dance in those contexts, let's do it. Let's get some junior researchers funded to do it and to fund the arts to help them do it, because it doesn't work without the artists being intimately involved with it. I'm afraid 5 million won't go very far if we do that, but that would be necessary.
That was quite a good answer. I would do something slightly different, science fiction, which might or might not work. So here's what I would do. I would take the money and I would build a device like a pair of glasses. And I think we almost have the technology to do this. And it would be like in Terminator, when he walks into the bar and there's a readout saying that guy's dangerous. No one's seen Terminator. Anyway, I'd have a set of glasses and it would give me a continuous readout of your engagement right now. So I can see a little glowing thing, like the life on a video game of the characters, about how engaged you all are. And I think you could almost build that right now, but certainly if you had 5 million, you could do that. I would then give that to different artists and say, how would this change what you're doing? And it's a weird question, but I think that might tell us stuff. Right? So if I had those for lecturing, which is a type of performance, that's really useful, because I can tell I've lost these people, that story didn't work, they're confused, and I could update. Right? If you're a stand-up as well, that may be useful for this thing. But would you use it if you're acting in a play? Would you use it if you're doing dance? How would that, if you had that super valuable information about moment by moment engaging, is that even going to be used by you? Or, are you the extreme of Miles Davis, who performed with his back to the audience because he hated them all and didn't want to know if they liked it? So I think if you had some super gadget like that and just giving it to people and see what they did with it, that might get at some of these questions that are very hard to unpick with experiments. And weirdly, you might be able to buy Jamie's yacht because the device wouldn't have to work. You just have to make people believe that it worked and then see how it changed what they did. So you could almost fake it and get interesting information from this real-time VR engagement feedback device that's just a black box and does it randomly.
This is a very interesting point, and it's kind of similar to the question I made in your talk, where if you could interact as an artist with the experience, the online experience of the people, what at the moment I can do by common sense and seeing the person yawning is less interested than that person that is looking at me. But the key question is how the artists use that information. We only can provide the data to the artists, and do we have any idea of how the artists can use this information, or if they are interested in using it? I'm looking at Matthias since he's the artist.
You probably need to draw to close as well.
I was going to close with this question, yes. But he brought the interesting point. Are artists interested in learning online?
Maybe.
Okay, I'll think. I would like to thank you, Jamie, Sonia, Albane, Daniel, and Guido for being part of this session and stay with this discussion. I don't know if I'm opening this to the people in the floor or I'm closing it. So the question to the floor is like they try to answer what questions they will answer with 5 million. What would you like them to do if they will have this money? Is there anything that you would like scientists like them to answer? Or if you have any other question not related to this, you can also put it forward.
Yeah, this is in relation to, I guess, not as a criticism, but what could be perceived as a kind of narrow bandwidth for what can be kind of taken as data in terms of synchrony and dysynchrony, engagement, disengagement, and electroencephalograph, what its limits are in terms of what it can tell us about experience. So what would be the technologies that you would like to evolve that could tell us something more about the idiosyncrasy of attention and engagement, or the kind of felt sense, or something that might be occurring between us in performance?
Who would answer this?
I'll say something because I keep jumping in quickly. Getting back to the sensor fusion stuff, like not just one sensor, because I don't think one sensor will ever tell, one ECG will ever tell you, EEG will ever tell you, I'm getting confused between my sensors, will ever tell you much. It'll tell you a bit, but if you combine it with different ones, you get a real much richer picture. So as many sensors as you can put on somebody unobtrusively, then we've got more to play with and figure out. So much is unknown about this stuff simply because it's so hard to get the data. This is very novel. The amount of data we've collected in this experiment is not typical, right? This is really unusual stuff. Like all the eye tracking data, the body movement data, the EEG, all of that, and all the video and audio.
So I guess with that, like, do you have any curiosity about other interdisciplinary kind of invitation that might research what some of that breadth of data could tell us that we don't yet know?
Yeah, more collaborations, more people involved looking at the data. And this data set will all be made available, I guess.
Yeah, I guess the slight complication is related to Daniel's point about annotation, is that if you're interested in felt sense and experience, sort of you always need that to give meaning to the data. Sort of the data in itself never means anything. Sort of like you need to either interpret it in light of, well, what were people experiencing, or like in the sense of like what came in, or in terms of what they made of it. So you always need to ground it somehow, always in subjective experience afterwards. I think that's a hard problem for sort of cognitive neuroscience in general, sort of And the way to get around it is by, we have various ways in which we try to get around it, but like to do it both at the same time is really tricky, because the process then of articulating, turning something into a languaged experience is in itself a cognitive process then, so how do you separate that from what's going on, when I ask you to articulate it, all of these things, so you can get more accurate in what you measure, but you still need to give it meaning.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I'm wondering, so the project, NEUROLIVE project is finished now, am I correct?
Not quite.
Not quite, But then you have a lot of questions and a lot of data, and I don't think the analyzation is not finished at all. Where is it going? Where are they going to be archived? Are you going to carry? Are you going to research about it? Who can do it? And what's going to be happen?
Yeah, we'll have to see. So it'll continue in different ways, but I think some of it will be archived, some of it will continue, hopefully, so there will be follow-up funding in some form, but yeah, it's the nature of these kinds of works that there's always so much more data and so many more things you can do, and it's never enough, and so 5 years is effectively quite short. And if you compare that, sort of like medical researchers who much more often have like 10-year horizons, so it's like, but we don't get that necessarily, and the arts get even less, so yeah, but it takes a long time, so you have to be creative and, sort of like see what opportunities arise, both with finding people and finding more money, and I guess that's the sort of pragmatic answer to that.
Well, I think the question you asked is the answer for you, Beatriz. The 5 million should go to a continuation of the project. I've been here for the last 3 days, and I knew the project, of course, but not intimately. But I've just been exposed to so much rich communication, such a dedication of interest and curiosity, openness, and the business about society not valuing the arts and various things. That's where the 5 million should go. You need 10 years to really continue. So I think there's no question. That's what should happen with it. To continue this project, it's one of the richest dance science environments, I've seen. So it's really a great thing you've done. I think that's where it should go.
Well, thank you. Thank you everybody. Thank you everybody in the panel and in the room. And with that note, good luck in getting more funding. We look forward to more NEUROLIVE version 2.
There's one day more tomorrow. Not done yet.
And another 5 years.